This is the Drake Insights Podcast, your weekly dose of cutting-edge senior living marketing insights. Join me, your host, Natasha Drake, for bold ideas, proven strategies, and inspiring stories straight from the experts. Tune in and let's conquer the senior living marketing landscape together. Hi guys, welcome back to the Drake Insights Podcast. I am your host, Natasha Drake from Drake Strategic. On today's episode, we're going to dive into paid media. If you remember a few weeks ago, I mentioned really investing time and money into your SEO and your content and your local listings. And I may have mentioned something about not just throwing paid dollars at Google. I wanted to jump back to that and say, I understand, in today's world, we need to be spending money on Google. However, there are strategic ways to do so in order for your spend to go further. And so I brought on one of my paid media experts, Matt Mesenger, to talk to you all a little bit more about that and how we can get our paid spend to go further. So welcome, Matt, and if you could introduce yourself.
Natasha, thanks for having me on, and thanks for bringing up this ever important topic here today. So yeah, as Natasha said, my name is Matt Mesenger. I'm currently an account director at a Northeast Ohio-based company called Choice Local. It's a franchise marketing focus. There is some involvement and partnerships that we have with some in-home care franchises at this point. But before my time at Choice Local, I spent several years, including a few years with Natasha here, partnering in the senior living marketing landscape. And at our previous stop together, I actually was the vice president of paid media, so leading up the team to focus on paid media initiatives for senior living. So have close to 10 years of experience, specifically with senior living marketing. And so really excited to have the opportunity. And again, thank you here for inviting me today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So let's go back to what I just mentioned. So I want to give the listeners a few top tips of what can they do, what can they work with their agency to do to help them get those paid dollars to go further. Like I mentioned, we talked about other things, whether it's direct or it's SEO or it's content or it's local listings. But in terms of paid media specifically, what are some, top tips and how can we jump off today with the listeners of how they can get their paid spend to go further?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you the high level kind of 3 tips or pointers that I like to talk about when conversations like this are coming up. But before I dive into that, just want to level set and just confirm that like somebody in my position who has been on the paid media side, especially within Google Ads, understand that it is a large line item, in many cases probably the largest line item on invoices that are out there. So the intense scrutiny, the questioning about the value of those dollars and the investment and the return therein, totally understandable, right? So that mindset, that perspective, and kind of the firsthand experience that I've had in talking with partners, clients, things like that, I totally understand that perspective. And that's really kind of shaped what I'm about to share here. So that said, at the very highest levels, right, there's, again, 3 tips that I have. So the first is related to account structure and by extension, some targeting. And I know, Natasha, you and I have talked about that, at length several times. So I'm sure we'll get into that here in a second, but making sure that your account structure is as buttoned up as possible can really go a long way to making sure that your ads and the messaging are delivering to the right people at the right time. Another important point is leaning more heavily into first-party data with CRMs. I'm sure we'll also get into that. We'll also get into that a little bit more. And then the third topic is really more of a perception shift, right? There's nothing I would say that's inherently actionable with this other than to readjust kind of the approach and the expectations here. And what I mean by that is that there are multiple sources of information that people will use when they're doing research online. And when you're talking about senior living specifically, it doesn't matter what level of care, if it's for yourself or for a loved one, that's a very big life decision that you're making there. And so it stands to reason that it's not going to necessarily be a knee-jerk reaction. And I would even argue this is the case in needs-based levels of care, assisted living and memory care, kind of come to mind for that. You're going to want to look at multiple sources of information to make sure that when you're making this decision, you're making the best choice. And so what this all boils down to is that we like to look in marketing at things kind of in an isolated silo, I think, generally speaking, right? So what's this channel doing? What's this channel doing? And what I think that does is that skews the kind of holistic and omni-channel kind of perspective that I think senior living communities, companies, marketers in the space, right? You need to have that perspective. And so when you're talking about paid media specifically, I think understanding and shifting your perspective to the idea that it's influencing directly or indirectly what's happening from a bottom line perspective, I think that's really important. And we can kind of get into that a little bit more, but there are studies that I'm currently doing right now that are relevant to this that show in a lift or indicate that there's a lift with increased investment in one channel leads to an increased performance in another channel, and vice versa if you're scaling back. So I think just to kind of tie that last point up, just shifting your perspective to look at how channels such as paid are ultimately influencing other channels and how that's ultimately affecting the bottom line, I think is a really key component, because if you don't do that, it might be a little bit myopic, I think would be a good phrase for that. So those are really kind of the 3 points.
No, absolutely. And that's something I mention a lot in these podcasts for my listeners is everything needs to be omni-channel. That's my number one marketing tip is making sure all of your different mediums are working together. Right. So I appreciate you bringing that up. About targeting specifically, if we can get back to that. I know especially in senior living and senior housing, that's something that we struggle with a little bit in terms of regulations and restrictions. And so what are some things you can give tips here to understand how we can better target for senior living?
Right. Great question. And this is, going to relate back to what we talked about with our first tip with account structure and targeting there. And just to clarify, right, for your listeners here, the 2 biggest Google specific policy guidelines that we work with or have to work around or kind of deal with or manage in the senior living space is HIPAA compliance and what's called the HEC policy, which is the fair housing and employment related policies. So I always like to say, because of those 2 policies specifically, paid media marketing in senior living is uniquely challenging and probably one of the most challenging verticals that I've ever been involved with because of that. So again, because of those 2 specific policy guidelines or requirements, if you will, right, it does require a little bit more creative thinking. The good news is my recommendation as it relates to how you can address that as it relates to the account structure is that there's really no roadblocks for you updating your account structure or setting up an account structure directly within Google Ads the way that I'm going to talk about here to kind of address that, right? So you can't know who it is, right, you're talking to or trying to display ads for, right? So what do? What's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing is to make the experience as seamless as possible. And the best way you can do that is to infer the consumer's or the potential customer, potential resident's intent in the searches that they're looking for. So a lot of times people might have some idea of the level of care that they're going for. So maybe they're looking to move into, 55 plus community or independent living, right? So they might have seen that around. So they're going to search for that. Assisted living, memory care specifically, that can get a little bit tricky at times, but people might be looking more for like assisted keywords, right? So if you start there with that, what you can do is you can use that as your foundation to build your account structure accordingly. So taking a step back, the way the Google Ads hierarchy is you've got the account level, then you have the campaign level, then you have ad groups, and within those ad groups, you've got the ads themselves and the target keywords that you're going for. So let's just use assisted living as an example. So what I would recommend you do is you say, let's create a campaign for assisted living and basically exclude other levels of care from that as much as possible. What that means is when you get down to the ad group and the ad level, right, you want to build off of themes. So, assisted living ad groups, your ads themselves should comment or mention assisted living in them. And this is crucially important, and I think oftentimes can get overlooked when you're talking about paid media as well, is the landing page experience as well. So when somebody sees your ad, right, it's talking about assisted living. Somebody searched for assisted living near me, whatever the case may be. That's going to resonate with them. So they're going to be more likely to want to click on that ad. But then when they get to the landing page, you better make sure that landing page, wherever that ad is sending them, is talking about the benefits of doing assisted living at whatever community you're trying to promote. And so if you replicate that with all the levels of care that are available at that community, right, what that does is that mitigates the challenges that you're facing with, right? You don't know who's doing the search. You don't really know anything about them, but you do know that if you're aligning this point of the game anyway, if you're aligning the experience with what the inferred intent is of those searches they're doing, that's going to be much more likely to generate those leads for you. Those people will get into your CRM, and then you can kind of work around that. So when I talk about, account structure, what I mean by that is that you should have your campaigns themed out by levels of care. And then within each one of those campaigns, your ads, the copy that's in the ads, the landing pages that are connected to those ads should be following the same themes. And even though it feels like maybe you're kind of, fumbling around in the dark a little bit, that helps give you a little bit of a kind of a guiding light there.
That's great. Thank you.
And one other thing that I'd like to say about this structure as well that I really enjoy and appreciate with this type of alignment is that budgets in Google Ads are aligned to the campaign level. So let's say you're looking at occupancy goals. You can also be a little bit more agile as a paid media marketer to allocate more dollars, more budget to levels of care where it's needed within the community, right? So you can not only serve more relevant and seamless experience for users, but you can also scale back or add to budgets as needed. So you can be a little bit more agile to support the needs of the actual business itself. So I think that's also an important note that should be made as well in support of the business needs.
Yeah, I know that's something that we had always done when we worked together as well prior at Attain. I did want to ask, when we were there together, we started using CRM data, and you had mentioned that as well. Can we talk a little bit more about how listeners can use the data they have from their CRM to, increase the quality leads that come from paid media?
Okay, yes. I still get just as excited about this as I always did, Natasha. So just fair warning on that. So this is a step deeper, right? So before the first tip that we were talking about there, just to reiterate with the account structure, that's meant to be, completely independent of any of these challenges that HIPAA and the fair housing policies provide. But what we're talking about here with the CRM data, which is leaning more heavily into first party data, is kind of another way to say that is, if you can have this integration, that's going to take that account structure and the benefits therein to the next level. So what we're basically saying here and what we're talking about here is there's ways that you can connect your CRM directly into Google Ads. And that's really powerful, another powerful layer, because what Google Ads will then be able to see when that connection is made is how qualified was that lead? Was that lead disqualified? Did that person get to the second conversation? Did they come into the community and tour? Those are some additional contextual clues that Google maybe wouldn't otherwise have, right? So what you're doing is when you make that connection into the CRM, you're not only saying these are the terms that we want people to see the ads against, you're also telling Google, hey, this person actually turned into, or this set of people actually turned into a qualified lead, to whatever degree you can take it. Now, Google can use this information to serve your ads to people who look like that person who is a qualified lead. So just to kind of clarify that point a little bit more, when you're talking about these fair housing and HIPAA compliance, privacy related policies that are a challenge, right, for senior living marketers and communities alike, that doesn't mean that Google doesn't know the information about these people. So Google's not sharing that with the community or the marketers doing, the marketing on behalf of those communities, but Google's able to basically use a daisy chain process where they look at the click IDs and they say, okay, we know that this click ID is attached to Jane Doe, and we can see Jane Doe in the CRM now. So they can basically connect those points and they can say, this is this person's age, this is where they were searching from, here's their personalized search history, and literally thousands of additional kind of contextual clues. And Google can say, hey, here's this whole other subset of people that we know that maybe you as the senior living, community or marketer, whatever the case may be, don't know. And Google can say, because that person was qualified, we're going to keep serving ads more and more to these people, right, who are qualified. So connecting the CRM data into Google Ads, if you can do it, is a no-brainer and definitely something that you should leverage your first-party data, for a lot more heavily if you're not already. So super exciting.
Yeah. And we had started testing that, and we were already seeing quality lead generation results from that. I mean, it's like you said, it's a no-brainer. I mean, a lot of these communities, you all have huge number of leads in your CRM. Let's use that data that you're getting And based on your CRM data, okay, have they converted? Have I spoken to them? Have they converted to a tour? Have they visited? Have they deposited? Whatever that might be, that helps us then tell Google, this is what a qualified lead looks like. So yeah, I love that stuff too. I hope more people start to use that to help increase their quality leads from Google. I do want to go into, I know we're wrapping up a little bit here, but I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned a mix of marketing and that holistic omni-channel approach, specifically with paid as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's really important for listeners to hear and understand that, as I'm interviewing each of you in the different disciplines, that it was really important to make sure that listeners understand it is truly a mix of all working together.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So to help kind of elaborate or clarify further on that point. So it's been several years, probably more than 10 years now at this point, but Google had released a study. It was called the Zero Moment of Truth, or the ZMOT study. And what they had concluded even then was that people would use 10 or more sources of information. It was either 10 or 11 more sources of information. But the bottom line is, it sometimes feels like we're just living in Google's world. But the reality is that there's really a lot more sources of information that people use to make even basic decisions, right? Let alone, moving yourself or a loved one into a senior living community, right? So what do I mean by that? So it could be SEO, it could be paid search, it might be word of mouth, direct mail, whatever the case may be, right? These are all sources of information that people are using in making this decision. What we often see happening, though, and we've seen evidence, Natasha, I know you and I have worked on this in the past as well, where, you might, if you try to isolate channel specific performance, and I'll just be kind of blunt about it, right? Cost per lead from paid is always going to look higher than, let's say, cost per lead numbers from SEO or organic channels or whatever the case may be. The reason that I say that that's a little bit more surface level and you should really dig deeper is because we've also, again, seen a correlative effect where when, let's say, paid search, PPC, got turned on, or there was an increased investment in that, there was also a concurrent lift in the visibility, in number of impressions or times that sites were showing up organically. It happened. It was kind of like PPC ramped up, and then a week later you saw SEO kind of follow that same trend. What we think is happening is that's indicative of people using multiple sources of information to make a purchase decision. So by ramping up PPC spend, what we think was maybe happening in these cases is maybe PPC was showing up for a term that maybe SEO wasn't ranking as highly for, but it was creating that brand awareness, right, for the name of that community. And so somebody would kind of file that away in their consideration set, and then they might come back to Google after they've done a little more search and they search by brand name for that community, and then they click on the SEO result. Or maybe they've even clicked into the ad. They didn't convert on the landing page where the ad was sending them, but they came back either, maybe directly, right? We've seen stuff like that happen. And so the issue, right, that I've always run into, and the challenge that I've always run into is that, again, if you just look at individual channels, you can draw potentially incorrect conclusions. Like, well, paid is less efficient. SEO is really efficient. Let's invest more in SEO. But what you're actually doing is maybe taking away one of those channels that was kind of lifting SEO, right? So when we say look at things holistically, what we're really saying is try to focus on, right, the bottom line. Are you trying to improve the health of your census? Do you have an occupancy goal that you're trying to improve or trying to hit, right, in a certain time frame? If you look at it at a media mix level, like, hey, if we have these 5 channels active, we tend to get more quality leads just coming through, right? Or if we pulled this back and quality lead flow started to drop off a little bit, right? If you look at it from a more macro perspective, that's what I strongly encourage, those who are in decision-making positions at communities or at marketing, partners for those communities. Take a look at it that way, because if you keep your eyes and focus really lasered in on or honed in on kind of what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, you can kind of take some of those implied results or impact there and make sure that you're continuing to invest in the mix of channels that it takes to get that bottom line impact where you want it to be. So I hope that.
And I agree completely. I just wanted to reiterate to our listeners,
Right.
This is everything from direct to
Absolutely.
PR to traditional media. I mean, think about if you have a press release out that then drives users online, and then they might click on the ad, but then PR is not going to get the credit, right? So it's just sort of that mix of all of them working together. I know I've talked about that before, and I appreciate you bringing that up today, Matt, specifically with paid media, because how many times do we see the ad over and over again, right? But then when we search and Google it in a different way, we end up clicking on a different search. But we know we've seen the ad. We know we've seen it in display or whatever it might be. So all of that working together, the direct mail that came to your house, then you got served up an ad, then you eventually Googled it, and SEO gets the credit, whoever gets the credit, direct could be, but it all worked together to finally influence that prospect to make that decision to move further. So I do think it's a really important topic that we need to talk about in all disciplines as well. So thanks for mentioning that. To end today, if you don't mind, recap or last ending tips if you want to give to our listeners before we leave for the day.
Okay. Yeah. So happy to do that. So yeah, just to recap, kind of the three main points, that we discussed here. So first and foremost, I think making sure that the account structure is buttoned up within Google Ads, right? So making sure that you have campaigns organized by themes, and by themes, I mean by levels of care, right? So that helps you be more agile with the budget to support whatever the needs of the business are, right? Making sure that you're doing that, keeping your perspective and your focus on the holistic media mix. That's definitely a key point. And I know that's easier said than done, right? Because the attribution, right? It seems like it's easy, but it's actually very difficult. And so sometimes there's got to be a little bit of a leap of faith there, but keeping your perspective on the holistic marketing mix and how that's driving toward your ultimate goals is key. And last but not least, if you're not already doing that, make sure that you're leaning more heavily into your first party data. And one of the best ways to do that from a paid media perspective is to connect your CRM data into Google Ads. If you're on Salesforce, there is a direct integration, but you can use a tool like Zapier. If you have another platform that you're using from a CRM perspective, you can do that as well. But those are really kind of the three key things. And Natasha, again, I just want to thank you for inviting me onto the podcast today. This is stuff that clearly I'm very passionate about, and I just appreciate having the opportunity in the forum to share some of these insights.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Matt. As you know, I'm also very passionate about it, as my listeners know as well. And so thank you so much for joining us today. If the listeners have any questions, they want to learn more, please reach out to me or Matt. We're happy to kind of dive in for you, or to your digital agency that you work with. It's really important to ask these questions and make sure they're digging in, just like we're mentioning. So that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us on the Drake Insights podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye. If you enjoyed watching the podcast today, please follow me and subscribe so you're notified for the next podcast. And if you have any questions or want to talk after about anything that Drake Strategic can provide for you, please reach out to me, call me, email me, or visit our website at drakestrategic.com.